Before the world knew his name, Charlie Chaplin was just a poor boy growing up in London. He was born in 1889, in a city filled with poverty, crowded streets, and enormous social differences. Chaplin's childhood was far from comfortable. From an early age, he experienced hardship and uncertainty. The streets of Victorian London became part of the world that would later inspire his films. As a child, Chaplin was fascinated by performers who could make entire crowds laugh. He soon discovered that performing could become more than entertainment. It could become his way out of poverty. He practiced constantly, studying expressions, movements, and the reactions of an audience. Behind the curtains, the young performer watched experienced actors and dreamed of becoming one of them. His natural talent for physical comedy quickly became obvious, but nobody could have imagined that this young performer would one day become a worldwide legend. As a teenager, Chaplin joined theater companies and began traveling across Britain. Every performance taught him something new about timing, movement, and making people laugh. Traveling from town to town, he slowly built the experience that would shape his future career. Eventually, Chaplin traveled to America with a theater troupe. America offered something he had never experienced before: enormous opportunities for performers. Backstage, he prepared for each performance with intense concentration. His physical comedy became one of his greatest strengths. Soon, the young British performer was attracting attention in American entertainment. Then came a completely new world: motion pictures. Chaplin entered the young film industry and discovered that his style of comedy worked perfectly on camera. Then, almost by accident, a legendary character began to take shape. A small mustache, a bowler hat, a cane, oversized shoes, and a ridiculous little suit. This was the Tramp, a character who looked poor but behaved with incredible confidence. Chaplin's face could communicate an entire story without saying a single word. He turned simple actions, accidents, and mistakes into unforgettable comedy. The Tramp might have almost nothing, but he always tried to walk like a gentleman. Chaplin's physical performances made audiences laugh around the world. People packed movie theaters just to watch the mysterious little man on the screen. But behind the comedy, the Tramp often represented loneliness, poverty, and the struggle of ordinary people. That combination of humor and emotion became Chaplin's signature. In a remarkably short time, Charlie Chaplin became one of the most recognizable people on Earth. Crowds gathered wherever he appeared. Newspapers constantly published stories about the famous comedian. Photographers followed him everywhere, eager to capture the biggest star of the silent film era. Chaplin was no longer just an actor. He was becoming a major force in filmmaking. He began directing his own movies, giving him control over performances, stories, and visual comedy. He carefully watched his footage, searching for tiny details that could make a scene better. His popularity became so enormous that fans sometimes surrounded him wherever he went. Hollywood had created many stars, but Chaplin had become something different, an international icon. The poor boy from London had become one of the most famous entertainers in history. With fame came wealth, independence, and the ability to create films exactly as he wanted. Chaplin understood that controlling his own work was essential to his artistic freedom. His productions became larger and more ambitious. Behind every comedy was a huge team of actors, technicians, and filmmakers. Chaplin could spend enormous amounts of time perfecting a single scene. He believed that even the smallest movement could change the way an audience felt. The man who had once known poverty could now afford a life of extraordinary luxury. But wealth never completely erased the memories of his difficult childhood. His success filled newspapers, theaters, and movie screens around the world. Yet Chaplin always understood where his journey had begun. His films often placed the Tramp in impossible situations. Factories, machines, streets, and crowds became playgrounds for his physical comedy. But Chaplin could also slow everything down and create moments of genuine emotion. The Tramp often showed kindness toward people who were even more vulnerable than himself. His stories could make audiences laugh one moment and feel sadness the next. That emotional balance was one of the secrets behind his enormous popularity. Chaplin wasn't simply performing comedy. He was telling stories through movement. His movies crossed language barriers because people didn't need to understand English to understand him. Audiences across different countries laughed at the same gestures and felt the same emotions. The Tramp had become a universal character. Then the movie industry began to change. Talking pictures arrived, and suddenly actors could speak on screen. For Chaplin, this created a difficult question. Should the Tramp start talking? Chaplin believed that the character's silence was part of his magic. While Hollywood rushed toward sound, Chaplin continued to trust visual storytelling. He spent years developing stories, scripts, and performances with extraordinary attention to detail. He even became deeply involved in the music of his films. Music allowed him to create emotion without relying on dialogue. His films continued to reach enormous audiences, but behind the success, Chaplin's personal life was becoming increasingly complicated. His fame also brought intense public attention. Newspapers began discussing not only his movies, but also his personal life and political views. The more famous Chaplin became, the harder it was to separate the man from the celebrity. At times, the world's attention left him feeling isolated. His political opinions also attracted controversy during a tense period in American history. Chaplin increasingly found himself surrounded by questions and criticism. Eventually, he decided to leave America for a new chapter of his life. He boarded a ship and watched the country that had made him famous disappear behind him. For a man who had spent decades in America, the departure was a major turning point. He was leaving behind Hollywood, but not the legacy he had created there. Chaplin returned to Europe, where his life entered a quieter phase. The energetic comedian of the silent film era was now an older man reflecting on his extraordinary journey. He eventually settled in Switzerland, surrounded by peaceful countryside. Far away from Hollywood, he spent more time with his family and enjoyed a quieter life. He also began looking back on his life and writing about his experiences. Old photographs reminded him of the poor child who had once dreamed of becoming a performer. His own films had become part of cinema history. Family became an important part of his later years. The crowds, cameras, and constant attention were now far away. Chaplin could finally look back on his life with some distance. He had survived poverty, achieved extraordinary fame, and endured controversy. And somehow, the little tramp had remained one of the most recognizable characters in history. Years later, the world once again celebrated Chaplin for everything he had given to cinema. When he appeared on a major stage, audiences gave him an emotional standing ovation. For a man who had spent his career making people laugh, the moment was deeply moving. His journey could now be seen as one incredible story: poverty, ambition, fame, controversy, and redemption. His hat and cane became symbols recognized almost everywhere. His films continued to play long after the silent era had ended, and the tramp continued walking into the distance, forever searching for his next adventure. Charlie Chaplin proved that you don't always need words to touch the world. Sometimes all you need is a story, a little courage, and a reason to make people smile.